Book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 through 11.
There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end.
Pray. A new employee has been caught coming in late for work every day. So he continued to do that, so the manager decided to discipline him one day and stopped him while he was coming in and asked him, "Look here, don't you know what time we start to work? We start to work around here. Don't you know what time we start working here?" He replied, "No, sir, they are always working when I get there." Time is different for different people. Keeping the time and knowing the time are different things. And in the reading we had today, we read a lot of times. A time for weeping, a time for happiness, a time to build and a time to tear down. There were 14 pairs of contrasts that we read in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We heard that everything has a time and there is a time for everything. Everything has a time and there is a time for everything. And there's also a season for everything and every activity under the heavens. These are some great sayings that are supposed to be written by King Solomon, the wise king of the history that we all know. He was looking at the life as a whole and was contrasting good and bad. As we step into the new year, we are leaving behind a year that has been like no other years that we have probably seen. From the catastrophic fires and the pandemic that we had and all the natural disasters that we had to face, among all of that we had the political turmoil in this country and also in some other countries around the world. We had a very tumultuous and an eventful 2020 that we just left. And we also saw the political unrest, social unrest in this country and around the world. And there was, above all, an impeachment. We have seen probably second time in my lifetime. So we are going through some unique times that we have not seen in the past. The stock market went down in March. And if you are a keen investor in stock market, the first time they ever had to suspend the trading during the trade hours. They had to do it 3 times in March because the market was going down and down and down. So they decided to stop trading for 15 minutes break for 3 times. So those are all things that catch us, but we all have learned to work through these things. Even with the stock market, I learned because of the 2008 economic recession that we had, the stock market went so down that we learned how to balance it. That's how when they decided hey, when this goes below a certain threshold, we have to stop. And trading was stopped. So we learned new things to adjust and accommodate because of these things that are coming through various ways that we may not feel comfortable with. Over the past years, we have been grieved to watch some of our beloved ones going through difficulties with their health, and also many of us probably have grieved the departure of our dear ones in the past year. But we also have rejoiced in many things, especially new lives, new babies, new beginnings in this world as well. The scripture today we took from the Ecclesiastes 3 are the words of wisdom that teach us as the opposites of life and how they all fit together. Life is full of events with a combination of contrasts. This illustrates that the 14 pairs that we saw here, some of them are bad and some of them are good. The writer is not justifying one over the other. Rather, he states that God's plan for life involves a variety of experiences and activities. Weeping may be part of life, but life is not all weeping. And also, we have laughter in this world. Construction is good in its time, but sometimes construction and deconstruction also becomes unavoidable. Wars may not be good, but it becomes a reality at times. Through every event, good or bad as we consider it, there's a purpose for everything that happens in God's plan. Like I probably mentioned in my book, that wars, the 2 world wars, changed our lifestyle drastically. Because of the Second World War, we had penicillin. Without penicillin, what would have been our life like? Because there was a need for invention. And as the need comes up, we will step up and do and face the challenges with new things, and we try out new things. So God has a purpose in its time, and everything has a time, and everything there is a season. When the author says that everything has a time, it's a point of time in the eternal time that we are given to live. Time was not invented by man. It was here when we came here, right? And it will be here when we leave here too. Time is not ours. Time was created for man to use, created by God, and God is outside of time. And He's outside of creation. That's why He can control time and He can control events. And He's a great, great, mighty God who can control time and events. A good question that we might ask is, what is good and what is bad? Many times we think certain things are good and certain things are bad. But in God's plan of things, these are all going to fit together to make up what we call life. A question was asked to a group of people, if you had only 1 hour to live, who would you like to spend your time with? To think about it. And one person in that group, above all, said, my pastor. And the pastors were excited, right? But he didn't stop there, but he continued to say that, well, he can make an hour feel like a lifetime. So that's how time is, right? Whatever you enjoy, you feel it very short. Probably won't feel like a lifetime today, believe me. But God is preparing all of these things to fit together in the whole span of life. Everyone goes through good and bad times. Together they make up the season of life. There's a time and there's a season. A time is a point of time as something happens. And the season is the span of time between 2 points. That's the way I look at it. You may not enjoy something happens at one point of time, but you can enjoy the season between the points. That is what the whole point is. The point of time may be threatening, a point of time may be terrible. But the season that brings between those points, it is up to you to decide you want to enjoy it or you want to make it miserable. You and I have that choice to make. The times of our lives do not shape us, but the seasons do shape us, who we are. So as we continue our journey through this new year in 2021, you may not like some of the things that come in certain points of our time, but let us be ready to enjoy the season between the times that we get. The seasons are more important than the times. If we were to pick and choose, we would love to be youthful and energetic, right? And nobody would want to get old and weak. But that is not the reality. We are all getting older. One more year means what? One more year getting older. Nobody is getting younger except some people, right? But we are all getting older. That's the reality. Mark Twain said like this: life would be infinitely happier if we could be born at the age of 80 and gradually approach 18. But it does not happen like that. Who would want to die if you are in 18? So old age has its own significance that God placed in there, so we will look forward to another home, that we can leave this place and be at peace with God in that home, that eternal home that God has prepared for us. So everything is fitting together in this world as we make our journey together. The way time, as we describe here and we understand here, is not that old. It has been only like in the early 1800s that the concept of time and standardizing time came to man as a whole, particularly in this country. In the 1700s, the French were trying a 10-day work week. When I started looking into, who started all these things, it was only like 1700s that they decided to make some standards about time. And they were using like a 10-hour days and 100 minutes in an hour and all of that, but it did not work out. And the Russians had a 5-day week that they tried and did not stand too long. But in the United States, we had many times. We had the New York time, and we had the Chicago time, and we had the Columbus time, and each state or each city had their own time. But that was making terrible problems for the railroad people who were taking the railroad traffic. So there was a standardized effort to standardize time in 1883. And they decided to make a law. In 1980 or 18 made a standard time act was enacted in 1980. So it is not that old. The time as we see it, as we describe it, is not that too old. But regardless of how old the time is, although we may describe time has not been around that long, God has been working with time since the beginning of creation. In fact, He is the originator of time, as I told you. The first mention of the time that we see in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 1, when we read, "So the evening came and the morning came, the first day, and the second day, and the third day." So God started working with time right from the beginning of creation. In this chapter that we read about the time and the seasons, the point is that he is ending that passage. If you paid attention to the verse 11, the writer says that God has made everything beautiful in its time. So even though all of this contrast between good and bad that we see fit together, God made all of the things fit together and made everything beautiful in its time. The proper activity, or the word beautiful that the writer uses in the scripture, is more like a word that says it's fitting. It is fitting. It's also been translated like that. So there is a fitting point in time that God has determined something should happen. The most beautiful thing God has done is that He made you and me fitting to be living in this time and in this day today. That's the most beautiful thing that I thank God for. Giving me a life in this world and to be here today and to work in His plan is the greatest privilege that God has given me, regardless of what happens around me. That's the most beautiful thing that God has done in my life. There are seasons that we can move through as individuals in any gathering, any church gathering or any gathering that we see around here today. We see people who are celebrating new life and also people who are concerned about their end of life. And there are people who are struggling and there are people who are happy and content. These are all part of reality of life. Also, we move through seasons in our families. As we become older, we become parents, we become grandparents. With the birth of every child, new parents are born, new uncles are born, new brothers and sisters are born. These are all seasons and times or events that are happening in our lives as we go through the span of life and the seasons of life. And there are also seasons we go through as a church. Some churches go through and go through different stages, and sometimes they close as some new churches coming to open. So these are all things that are happening around us that are realities in the span of time. But the good news is that the gift of new life gives us hope and fresh energy, endings and new beginnings, times for grieving and also times for celebrating. These contrasting seasons of good and bad in our lives are given to everybody and nobody is exempt. If I could choose only the good ones and somebody else get all the bad ones, it would not work like that. It is given to everybody, and life is an equal opportunity giver. And you get what you get. It is not for you and me to pick and choose what we are to get. It's like a deck of cards. Sometimes you get a good hand and sometimes you get a bad hand. And then you ought to work with what you got. And you have been handed a deck that you don't choose. And it is not up to choose what you ought to get. We would all like to choose some of these things and not others, but very quickly we realize that it is not our choice to choose what is given to us. So one lesson that I learned from 2020 is that I could never say it cannot get any worse or we have seen it all. That's what one lesson that I learned. The reality that these experiences have made us stronger and more resilient and ready to meet any challenge that is ahead of us. No matter how exhilarating and confusing and fearful the situations be, we will rise because we have a faith that is stronger than any forces out there. Eternal God is our refuge. Underneath are the everlasting arms. And He is holding us in the palm of His hands as we step into this new year. Paul tells us, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Rejoicing is easier than mourning, but both are realities that we have to do. Not just to play for the same team, but to be one another's cheerleaders as we go together in this journey. So no matter which season you find yourself in at the moment, we are part of a family that cares about each other. Let us continue to do that and love each other as God has loved us. Sometimes when we see the bigger things happening in front of us, we get scared, frightening. Like I used to take my children when they were younger to climb the Stone Mountain. We used to go there regularly. But some days when we go there, I ride to the mountain, I see the mountain from while we are driving ahead of us. The look itself is threatening, and I didn't want to go there. But the kids would not let me go back. So they want to go and climb it. and finally I decide to go. And once we get there and we make the decision to forge ahead and confront the situation, something will come in and give me the energy to climb. That is what we are to do. In situations like that that threaten us, the mountains in front of us may be threatening, but we have the resolve with the faith that God has given us to go forward. He will be there giving us the energy and the strength to climb any hills that are in front of us. So let us continue our journey of this time together as we go from this place, to know that God is with us. He is an eternal God, and time is in His hands and not in our hands. And may the good Lord bless you with these words as we continue our journey together.